Hello and welcome to the TRF Healing Connections podcast. I'm James Buffin, and in this episode, we'll be talking to Patricia Vickers about healing from generations of oppression imposed on Indigenous people on the west coast of Canada. Patricia's new book, Singing to the Darkness, Monologues and Meditations, presents a human story centered on the spiritual energy of respect as action that points towards wholeness. Singing to the Darkness unfolds a visual inquiry and integrative process fulfilling her intention to help others to observe their authentic selves, especially all those who have been conditioned through colonization of Indigenous people. In a moment, you'll hear my conversation with Patricia. Before we get to that, I want to share some things from the TRF newsletter that highlight important topics all related to the theme of this year's conference, attachment. This week's featured article is from Maria Murriel, and it's titled, Border Family Separations Are a Public Health Crisis for the U.S. and the Americas. Child separation is the leading cause of trauma in the U.S., and statistics show that most adults who suffered this childhood trauma develop hazardous health conditions. Among them are substance abuse, obesity, respiratory disease. These conditions are harmful to the individuals suffering them. They take a serious toll on their loved ones, and they often require people to lean on government assistance to get through life. The migrant family separations occurring at the border for nearly a decade now are creating traumatized children who could very likely grow up to become traumatized adults who require greater care from systemic safety nets on either side of the border. We encourage you to be part of the conversation in the TRF comments section. In that spirit, I have one more thing to share with you before the interview with Patricia Vickers. Put June 21st in your calendars for the next quarterly virtual networking meeting for TRF members all around the globe. This is a unique opportunity to continue the conversation with your peers the world over. You can sign up by logging in to your TRF account page. And now it's my privilege to share with you my conversation with Patricia Vickers.
In 2006, I went to therapy with a family member, and he had given me information that I didn't have access to with my mind. It was in my brain, but not my mind. And I learned then that I had dissociative amnesia. I was really disturbed by, when I did EMDR, the memories that were coming. And so I stopped. And then it wasn't until 2017 that I was close to my nervous system crashing. And I had worked with Ulrich Lanius. He's a colleague, that's Ruth's brother, and Stephen Osteen. These were two psychologists I'd worked with in Port Hardy. So the majority of my work has been with Indigenous people. So I went into neurofeedback lens, and the bulk of the work was with Ulrich, and retrieved a great deal of childhood memory that made sense. It was also tragic and depressing, but I had memory that I didn't have before, and that was the good thing. So then I was employed by First Nations Health Authority as the clinical director for the province. And I began to say, okay, what we need to do is provide trainings that will help the people to know that it's in the brain. It's not because we're inferior. It's not because we're defective as human beings. It's because our history of oppression has been traumatic intergenerationally. So I contacted Ruth because Steve had let me know the work Ruth was doing. And so back in, it would have been 2016, I connected with Ruth. And so it was basically a connection. And then I asked Gabor for help, and I contacted Bessel, and he gave me some suggestions and recommendations for training, that there be integrative time for participants. And that was the most important thing, was to provide them with information that's going to help them to form words or an expression of their life experience. So I developed the trainings based on recommendations from Bessel and Gabor, but also I was a somatic experiencing graduate, and so I got permission from the board at the time to use their curriculum, and the trainings went really well. I developed two. One is a brief trauma training, which I delivered to all of the health directors in the province. And then I developed a 3-week program, which is more like a treatment program, where those who are providing drug and alcohol counseling, all indigenous, drug and alcohol counseling, their cultural leads in each region, the social workers, all of them were welcome to come and to do this 3-week training program, which was information on the neurobiology of trauma, and then group processing, and then the art therapy, the integration time. I don't have to go far to be able to give a history of atrocities. So I went to St. Joseph's when they threw the cornerstone into the ocean. It was a Catholic Indian residential school. St. Michael's was Church of England. There at St. Joseph's, when they did the washing, it's in Coast Salish territory on Kuper Island. And when they were doing the washing, that's when the people spoke of their experience in St. Joseph's. And one man was just barely able to get out of his mouth the words that his 5-year-old sister was pushed from the window on the 2nd floor when she was 5 by one of the nuns and died on impact on the ground. It's a part of our history. So is segregation and dehumanization, and generations of this. So in my grandparents' time, it existed, this dehumanization through oppression. And after Indian residential schools was the 60s scoop, where children were forcibly removed from their families and put in foster care, where some were adopted out, others just went from foster home to foster home, were sexually abused, were emotionally abused, were physically abused. So we have decades and decades of this history. So that's why some would look to their ancestral history rather than to their national history. Our way of living, our social structure, we say, was given to us by, in Tsimshian, it's Samoyed Dimlacha, the chief of the skies. Here it's Salana, also a reference to a supreme being. And that these ways of living, we can call it our protocol, our process, but the law is about how we are organized socially. So we're matriarchal on the coast. And because my mother was not indigenous to the coast, she was adopted by an Eagle chief. Her lineage was from England. So she was adopted by an Eagle chief so that she would have a place in society, and so would each one of her children, 7 of us born to her. And that's important because without a place, then you don't exist. And so my mother was an Eagle. And if we're looking at law, I'm not permitted to marry another Eagle. My marriage is to one of the 3 other tribes in marrying in Tsimshian, Gitsan, or Niska territory because they're all Somali speaking people. So that's an example of a law. That's an important one. Also in law is that the father's side, when there's conflict, the father's side also, they do more than marry and bury. When there's a conflict, the father's side come in to help to resolve the conflict. So here on Haida Gwaii, I was invited to a feast, a Making It Right feast over 20 years ago, where someone who had been drinking had hit someone else, and eventually the person who was hit lost part of their leg. And so the one who was driving changed his life. And then over time, he carved, he hired people to weave, he bought many, many household items. I don't know how, over $100,000 worth of gifts for sure. And then this person also fed all of us who were there to witness, because at a feast, if you're not related to the person who's making it right, it means you're there as a witness and they pay you to witness. And the witnessing is important because then if somebody's to bring it up later, oh, well, this, and this, to criticize the person who made it right, then as a witness, our responsibility is to remind that that was made right and it's been wiped away.
As you're describing this, I'm hearing things that are familiar to me from what my knowledge is of restorative justice. So this is distinct from the North American Western notion of justice, which is punitive, lock up the bad guy, and often leaves people who are seeking justice wanting and lacking and feeling like they have no control over the process. This seems very distinct from that, with safeguards built in. Is there anything you'd like to add on this note?
I would agree with what you've just said. And I would say that I'm only just beginning, as I'm on my personal healing journey, to understand the depth of wisdom and compassion that's in these laws. Very, very deep. And the importance of humility, which means that I accept there is so much that I don't know. But I can trust wisdom, I can trust truth, I can trust compassion, I can trust these things. What I've seen over and over again, especially in a memorial feast, is the energy from these attributes, present. And in a healing way, in a way that affirms who we are and how we're all related, how we're all connected. What's important is the cleansing. Then how do we make clean? So if I say what it is that I've done wrong and I know what I've done wrong, but I haven't covered it all, well then if you're my brother, then your responsibility is to help me see what's beyond my peripheral that I've done wrong, so I can be fully accountable and responsible, because that's a part of the making clean. And when we make clean, then that is in us, that compassion, wisdom, peace, calm can come up.
This idea of seeing past, or having this wisdom where you can contextualize things that people perhaps may not be able to see yet themselves. Can we touch on anger? Because anger is such a loaded thing that it's there's the thinking that you shouldn't be angry, or that if you are angry that there's something wrong, or that anger is terminal in some way. Um, and yet it's possible to destigmatize anger, isn't it?
There's a place that we get to when we're angry, where if we slow it down, what I see with myself when I pull that emergency brake is that resentment. When it's no longer just anger, then it moves to resentment. And I really appreciated Thich Nhat Hanh's book, Anger, Wisdom for Cooling the Flames. And it was, I think so many elders, they knew this, what he wrote about anger, that there's a place that we get to, and that's where we make the decision to let go, to move beyond my emotion, to see the bigger. So I think that it's simply a flashing light to say, pay attention, pay attention. So when we have so much anger, I would say, oh, look at all the people who are not paying attention, because they don't know how to.
So you also talk about how the answers, when people are seeking healing, that the answers are within the seeker. So there's this sort of two-sidedness to this, where there may be people around them who understand the context, and yet at the same time, the answers are within the seeker. Can you elaborate on that?
Yes, sure. So probably just last week, that was me you're describing, where I don't know how to do something. I don't know how to deal with this resentment. And and then now, because I've had people teach me, and really it's this simple, to be still and to be quiet and to observe. That's all, really. And then in doing that, and for me, I believe in the supernatural. That's why I have medicines. That's why I do ceremony. That's what helps me to see, and to see, oh, really, this is about forgiveness. Even the smallest things, just saying that. I can say I let go, but sometimes I need to say, I forgive. So that when resentment comes around again, or when I bump into it again, because I'm reworking some anger, I can return to that place, right? That's what I did, because that's what the monkey mind will do. It says, hey, wait a minute, goes back and picks up whatever that was again.
You've said in healing processes that forgiveness comes later. There's the notion, popular notion, that you need to forgive. If you've been done wrong, you need to forgive, and you need to do it for yourself. And that's never really sat all that well with me as a place to come from. And it sounds to me like you're talking about forgiveness almost like as being a byproduct of going down a good process, is how I interpret what I've heard you say. Is that accurate? Can you talk a bit more about what forgiveness comes later, what that means to you?
My mother was a missionary, so being raised in religion, I was going to say religiosity, for me, that's where I encountered that. Oh, you have to forgive. it'll all change, or it'll all be better when you forgive. So forgiveness is the magic answer. And like love, I really didn't know what that meant, because of incest. What was love? I wasn't ready to forgive for some time. And I had to be honest about that. I had to be truthful that I was in hatred. I hated him and I wanted him dead. It was horrible, really, to be truthful about being in that place. It's a very dark place. Yeah, it's a place of anguish. It's taken you back to something in childhood. And so it takes time to figure it out, and then to see, oh, that person simply rang the bell and awakened me to something that I haven't processed yet, or that I haven't finished processing yet.
The amount of healing that you bring is very inspiring to me. And how does this inform your work in supporting other people?
Having found within me just,
Wow, I feel that too.
the beauty of an innocent child, having had the assistance of others, having had the supernatural, and seeing how I survived, and seeing that's magic. So having found it in myself, I know it's in the person that's across from me. I know it's there.
As a non-Indigenous, first-generation Canadian, I want to extend my profound respect to Patricia for sharing her story with me so it can have a place here on the TRF podcast. If you haven't already, I encourage you to register for the 32nd Annual Boston International Trauma Conference, where you can hear Patricia Vickers speak on Saturday, May 29th. Everything will be presented online. In the meantime, if you're looking for even more resources, remember to check in to the TRF Tuesday workshops, where programming from awesome people like Leisha Skye, Josephine Wickstrom, Linda Ty, and Daphne Lender are all offered in 8-week programs, all for free. The current featured program is called Simple is Profound MNRI Reflex Integration, with practical tools and exercises from the Maskatova method to help your body and the clients you work with become more stress resilient. The folks at the Trauma Research Foundation have been working really hard to make this year's virtual conference a special one. I hope you can make it and be part of the long and deep history of this amazing event. For now, this is James Buffin signing off. Peace, love, and gratitude to you all.